Without further ado, I can welcome our first speaker to the stage. So this is going to be Marcin Gorny from the Web3 Foundation. So just Marcin, whenever you have a chance, just you can turn your camera and or mic on. A little bit about Marcin. Marcin likes math, software, and prototyping, and has been part of the Web3 Foundation grants team for 1.5 years. And today's Marcin's talk is going to be about validators or antennas, or why it's important to run your own nodes. Awesome. Take it away. Like a shirt, Marcin.
Great. Yeah, joined representing
to share your slides. Yeah, it's good to go.
Oh, okay. Because I couldn't.
I tried to give you the thumbs up there, but if you put it into presentation mode, it looks like it's going into full screen.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thanks for the intro. So as announced, we'll talk about the importance of running your own validators, or general running your own nodes, and gave the title of validators or antennas, and you'll find out why in a second. First, let me briefly introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Marcin from the Web3 Foundation. I'm currently in the grants team / research engineer role, and been here for 1.5 years. And my journey in general as a developer and engineer has been started at building front ends. So mostly using JavaScript, HTML, the early days. And then moved on to mobile development, mostly Android, but also cross-platform stuff. So Cordova at that time, for any of you that have been that know what I'm talking about. And then I moved to kind of a mix between backend and cloud services, cloud computing. So did a little bit of kind of a hybrid backend DevOps position at 2 previous companies. And then I moved into the Web3 space, and specifically to work with the Web3 Foundation on Polkadot. So let's start. Let's get to the core of why are nodes like antennas. And I realized that historically this is not the most accurate analogy, but I think it works well for our purpose. And so basically, like in the early days of satellite television that started in 1970s, it was quite difficult to get your own satellite dish. So people were either building them at home and in their workshops, or buying them for like thousands of dollars. The first one was, I think, available for the first commercially available one was $36,000. And otherwise, you had to rely on cable TV, but that limited you to whatever your provider. That point, I guess it was HBO in the States mostly. What you were limited to what your provider offered. And so, some hobbyists and enthusiasts wanted to tune into programs and channels around the world, and also not just that, also maybe listening on some military communication, right? Because at that time, not everything was as secure and encrypted as it is now. And so, yeah, your only hope was maybe trying to convince the cable provider to include these foreign TV channels in your subscription. But you most likely that there was not much hope for that. So the alternative was, as I said, building your own antenna, and that's basically where the analogy comes from, right? So rather than if you want to participate in something novel, in this case, this was the satellite television, you had to have your own infrastructure, right? Otherwise, there were some chances that the public goods providers would cater for your needs, but there was no guarantee, and you had to rely on them. So if I'm going to talk for the specific use case of Polkadot, but of course this relates to any other network, and maybe not the same, not all the points, but the general idea. So why is it important to run your own node? Like, what can you actually do? What do you need a node for, right? So I guess the most obvious use case is submitting your transaction on chain and also verifying that they have been submitted and verified. So that's the most basic need that everyone will have. Then if you want to go take it a step further, you might want to validate the network and make sure that it is secure. So in case of Polkadot, this will be running a validator on POW chains. This will be running a miner and producing the blocks. What you might want to also do is just generally browse the chain history and the data that is available there. And if you could track transactions across different accounts, you could do all sorts of on-chain analysis, and there's quite a bit of data to be extracted there. And if you are using someone else's node, you can expect that there are multiple people, possibly hundreds or thousands, connected to that node and running queries. And so if you want to gather data quickly, you're better off having your own thing and having lower latency, right? You might also want to provide a public good type service for your friends, neighbors, and family. Sharing is caring, and if not everyone perhaps has to have their own node. I wouldn't necessarily say that. Like, if you're just using this for submitting transactions, maybe it's fine that you ask your colleague for their endpoint rather than spinning up a node yourself and investing time and money and resources into this. So I encourage you to share it publicly within your circles if you have your own node, so that everyone can benefit. And unless you're running query heavy applications, you're most of the time not utilizing the whole bandwidth or the whole computational power of your network, of your node. And of course, if you are running a dApp, or you have some kind of specific use case that you have end users that rely on your on a good connection to get on-chain data, then obviously you don't want to rely on someone else to provide that for you. I guess best example would be being an exchange, a centralized exchange. In that case, you really want to validate stuff yourself. You really want to make sure that you're connected to a wide range of peers and that your transactions get submitted and verified quickly. So these are the use cases, and I guess for some networks you can add a few more. So current decentralization status on Polkadot, I guess could be better. We have a lot of nodes that are run by a single entity, and well, fortunately, not all of these are in the active set, or it's definitely far from becoming a majority, but still, it's having an idealistic view, it's perhaps farther from ideal, right? So that's why I'm running my own node, and that's why I'm giving this talk. So okay, let's get to how you can actually do it. And I guess the two most common approaches is having your own setup at home, or having this setup at somewhere in the cloud. And then the third one I'll talk about briefly is some kind of hybrid approaches. I wasn't quite sure which category to put it in, so I just gave it a separate one. So if you want to run stuff at home, what do you actually need? Well, it depends on what you're doing. So there's some difference between running a validator and running just a pure archive node. So you're not supposed to mix them up, right? Just for clarification, because your archive node, so like a public endpoint, this should be able to handle a lot of queries, but shouldn't be responsible for securing the network, right? And it's quite the opposite for a validator. The validator should talk to a lot of its peers and exchange messages that are important for securing the network. So best practice is to not have them on one machine, but rather split it up, right? So if you're running a validator, there's a little bit more of a memory requirement than for an archive node. So these are roughly the numbers, around 1.7 to 2.3 gigabytes of RAM. CPU, so we have, if you go on the Polkadot official wiki, there's a specific recommended minimum requirement for your processor, but I wouldn't worry too much about this because most modern devices that you can buy commercially are going to be probably good enough. And of course you need a good network, right? This is for example why I'm not running a node at home, and I would love to, but the only network connection I have is my Wi-Fi hotspot, which is only when I have my phone on me, right? Because I live in a old neighborhood, and unfortunately there is no reliable connection. Spoiler alert! Once Starlink comes to Switzerland, hopefully I can try. But yeah, so you need a good network connection, because otherwise you run a risk of getting slashed if you're offline for too long. You'd have to, on Polkadot, you have to be offline for really quite long to get slashed. Otherwise, you just get what is called chilled, which means you basically get out of the set, the active validator set. And what are the costs? Well, the upfront costs depends on what machine you have, but if you're if you're going for the kind of minimum requirements, this is going to be fairly trivial. And of course, you have to think about electricity in your country and in your specific zone. Like, do you have good tariffs at day, night? And maybe you need a specific setup for internet. Maybe you want to make sure that you have 2 providers, or maybe you have you come up with something custom, right? And in this space, so for just a validator node that doesn't have all the chain data, all the historical chain data. So for example, you couldn't query block 0 and get all the transactions from that block. So for that validator node, you would need around 40 gigabytes of disk space, and for an archive node, 215 as of today on Polkadot. And these numbers will be a little bit higher for Kusama. First of all, because Kusama has been running for longer. And second of all, it's because there's multiple parachains connected to Kusama, and the nodes are doing much more work, and they need much more data. And based on these requirements, I guess getting a Raspberry Pi, like the newest model, which has 4 gigabytes of RAM, that should suffice. As I said, I haven't tried it at home, but I hope to do so in the near future. So that's running the node at home, and let's move to the cloud. So obviously the biggest advantage of running it in the cloud is that setup is easy because you don't have to get the hardware yourself. And if you're running just 1 or 2 nodes, you could do all the grunt work of creating a server and configuring it. You could do it yourself, but the major providers like AWS, Azure, Hetzner, GCP, they have good plugins that you can just so you can basically have infrastructure as code, and yeah, that's nice for if you have probably more than 2. You don't want to do this by hand all the time. Cost is not that bad, so you can expect around $75 to $150 per month on Hetzner. These numbers are going to be higher for GCP and AWS and so on, and mostly because Hetzner just provides bare bones machines, whereas on and on AWS you have like so many different services on top of that that they charge you more, and so the cost here is based on 2 different machine types that I'm using, for example. And biggest advantage, I guess, is you have, or at least you expect to have a reliable network connection, so you don't have to worry about that. And cautionary note: some providers are not so happy to let you run blockchain stuff. So I wouldn't necessarily say what you're doing with your accounts. And a good example on Hetzner, by default you get like 8 virtual cores that you can use, and if you need more, you have to kind of request a limit increase. And what happens is that they will ask you for a reason, and some of my colleagues have put in like blockchain validation, and they were denied because Hetzner doesn't want blockchain projects to run on the servers. And there is some reasons for that. I won't go into details right now. You can check out Reddit. But basically, I would probably say like you want to scale up operations or distributed computing or something like this, right? Yeah. So which is not a lie. Like it is distributed computing. It's just not. It's just framing it a bit differently, right? And a good thing from my experience is that if you start early and pay your bills on time, then they allow you to scale up kind of in a more progressive fashion. Whereas if you just set up an account now and right from the very first day, request a limit of having 1,000 cores, that might be a bit problematic. It's because obviously they, as a business, they are worried that you're going to use up 1,000 cores worth of computing for a month and then not pay your bills. So it's kind of understandable, right, from this perspective. So the third approach, hybrid, as I mentioned, getting a friend or a project that you can partner up with and kind of share the resources is great. And I have shared my you'll see my endpoints later. I shared these within the foundation, and some of my colleagues are using these endpoints. So right, I encourage everyone to do that. Second option is it's kind of what some of Ethereum projects are doing. So you can rent out physical hardware that is already set up for mining, and this is not available on Polkadot. Like, well, obviously we're not doing mining, so the resources are not that intense, and perhaps it's not as valid as valuable a business model as for Ethereum or Bitcoin. But there could be at some point a service where you basically have a one-click deployment of a validator somewhere in the cloud, and you don't have to worry about anything at all, right? And then you have kind of specialized hardware that is already pre-built with validator infrastructure, validator software on on the machine. So an example is one of the grantees from our program, actually, Avado. They have these. You can get a box, and you go into their app store, and basically can download a Polkadot package or a Kusama package, and they're planning to support parachains at some point as well. So this is kind of home setup, but a little bit tweaked, I guess, or a little bit made it a little bit easier, right? And then you pay once for the box, and then you just you have to care about electricity later. Okay, and so if you're this was about running nodes and validators. A few points about validators specifically that you have to take into account if you want to be part of the active set, right? So you need a self-stake, or you need to acquire a lot of nominators, right? And at the time of probably like as of last week, when I checked, this was 1.7 million dots. So that's depending on the market price, around 60 to 80 million dollars in either self-stake or all nominations. So it's non-trivial, and it's hard for individuals to just get in the active set unless you were in there from the start, right? So this is something to take into account. There's a little bit more of security considerations that you have to take into account as well, compared to having an archive node, right? Because here you have keys that, when compromised, could lead to some problems for you. So you could get slashed, for example, if someone misuses your keys, or you could just lose your stake if you're very uncareful. And something I wanted to mention is that the foundation is running a 1,000 validators program. So that kind of helps with points A and B. You're quite unlikely to get 1.7 million dots of nominations from day one, but thanks to the program, you might get into the active set from time to time. And so we have this on Kusama and Polkadot. I won't get into too much detail now, but feel free to check it out. This was also a way for me to get in the active set from time to time, and yeah, it's quite a good initiative, and really working towards this decentralization of the network. So finally, if you want to support me or use my node, here are the details. So I have 2 validators on Polkadot, 2 on Kusama. Here are the addresses. So feel free to nominate me. I have 2 and 3% commissions on Polkadot, a bit more on Kusama. I think I'm at 10%. And yeah, this was through the 1,000 validator program. And then my archive node, we can use basically the endpoint that I provided here, and hopefully have low latency. If not, then ping me please, and I will try to fix it. And that's it. We have 1 minute for questions. So in case anyone has any questions, feel free to.
Yeah, thanks, Marcin. That was a great talk. I feel like we often spend so much time focused on the software side of things that we forget that we still need people to run nodes and to keep that part of the network infrastructure robust. But yeah, we do have 2 audience questions for you. First one being, do you think the nominated proof of stake mechanism can be improved to increase decentralization?
Yeah, so I guess what needs to happen right now is to increase the number of the size of the active set. So right now on Polkadot, we're at just below 300, and there's a motion in place to increase up to 400 gradually. So that's a first step, but it's still far from what we need to actually achieve decentralization in a proper sense, where you have 1,000 people participating in this 1,000 validators program, and these are more likely than not separate individuals, right? They're not big companies. So if we could get these people to become part of the active set, that would be great, right? The mechanism itself, well, I think the one we have right now is fairly good in terms of allocating the nominations to decentralize the stake as much as possible. And that was the design goal of the algorithm, Fragment, it's called. And our research team is working on improvements to that all the time. So I think there's efforts to there's still room for improvement, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Definitely agree with that. Another question here: how realistic is it for someone technically illiterate to run their own node?
I guess that depends on what technically illiterate means exactly, right? Like, can you spin up a server through a cloud provider and then follow some tutorials? Because that's what you have to do in the minimum mode case. So I think it's not unrealistic to do that. Of course, if you want to have more sophisticated setup and have multiple validators, scalable network, and so on, it's a bit more difficult. But I think we have fairly good tutorials and Polkadot Wiki, and you could try to spin it up, and shouldn't be that bad.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the cloud approach that you were talking about. This
Definitely, yeah,
quite a bit more accessible.
Yeah,
and like you said, it's really a matter of just following a few tutorials. So yeah, I think just about anybody with a level of interest to do that would probably have the aptitude to actually be able to do it. Cool. So one more question. Can you talk a little bit more about why you switched from traditional development to the blockchain world? And what are your thoughts on the space as someone that comes from a more traditional background?
Mm-hmm. So by education, I'm a mathematician and engineer, and I was missing the math component in the web tool. Like, as probably the most you can hope for in mobile development is calculating the position of your buttons on the screen, right? Relative to the border or something, and so that wasn't satisfactory. So I moved into Web3, where you have a lot of cryptography and also different protocols that are based on economic incentives, which nicely tie into the cryptography, and this was really the driving force for me. And for anyone coming to Web3 from the traditional space, I guess expect to move fast. Yeah.
Definitely relate to that. It's basically a parabolic learning curve from day one. Make the agreement that that's going to be a part of your career moving forward.
Right.
But it's definitely exciting. Cool. And so, yeah, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us today. It was a really cool topic.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I noticed that you had some links at the end of your slides. Is there any other contact information you'd like to share, Twitter, or anything like that that you use if people have questions they'd like to engage with you directly?
Yeah, maybe I'll just post my Twitter and
yeah, for sure. You can throw in the chat if you want.
Great.
Awesome.
We'll do that later.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Marcin. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, then I guess I switch off. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Awesome.